makes my soul drift away. Hello. How are you all doing? Let's see, we have got the live chat set up, not in top chat mode, in live chat mode, otherwise it will jump around like a nutty thing. And I hope you're all well, and I hope you can all hear me. I'm never quite sure, because you never know. It can be sometimes quiet and sometimes loud. Sometimes it flashes red at me, telling me I'm gone too loud. Sometimes it doesn't flash enough at me. Right, so... Hello, Peter Dawson. Hello, Calvin Gasberg. Hello, Albert Zaski. Hello, Rick Basava. Hello, Gordon Collins. Hello, Grace Harsky. Hello, Captain Seaford. Hello, DGV40. Hello, Ian Carr. Hello, Sam Thompson. Just on lunch. Waiting for a glass shipment. Almost done my tenner, though. Enjoy. I was asking, for pre and World War II, yes, but World War I, it's a massive mishmash. Plenty to go. Seem to be running out of RN cruiser classes. For post-World War II, yeah, pre-World War II and post... Yeah, but I haven't started working my way back yet, and there's fun still to be had. And then I can work through destroyer classes and battleship classes and aircraft carrier classes. And then at some point I can start working on foreign navies and go through their classes. Basically, I started with the RN cruisers because they're the ones I knew best of all. Although currently, I am going to do a quick change. Let's see. That's made things slightly better. That has made things ever so slightly better. I put the curtain across. And let's see, we have got Dove Squad. Hello. Hello, Tasha Talvashel. Hello. Right. Might not be good news or no, but riders are not showing up again. Just grabbing my mince pie box. I literally mean my box of mince pies. This is my mince pie box. Basically, my sister has been ordering all sorts of things again. And, yeah, mince pies have come in abundance. Hello, Sean Everton. Hello, Derp Squad. Did you hear the USMRMC is getting a new motto? Semper Maracunas Calamascara. Really? Matthias Slavic, good evening. I'm hearing voices. Bring forth the large magazine. Hello, Vinny Bryce. Hello. Hello, Engaging Strategy. Hello, Andy PWR. Hello. Hello, Wesley Phillips. Hello, Jim Swingle. Hello, Paul from Chicago. Okay, I know which Tiger class you're talking about, but I can still hope. You're actually probably going to enjoy this because I'm not just going to do the Tiger class, okay? Actually, I have to admit, the end of this does go right up to date. So this could otherwise be known as cruisers from during World War II to the present day, and Alex talks his way through the British Pacific Fleet and various other cruiser things which cruisers get up to. Hello, Steve Richards. Hello, Godshago. And I'm doing well, thank you. I hope you're all well and I hope you're enjoying. Mince pies are nice, and my sister basically, since Christmas, their shops are still stocking some, and they're still getting, they're still well in date and being sent out. So, yeah, and they are really, really cheap. So my sister decided it's a cheap way of feeding me. Time Squad, it translates to always eating crayons. Yeah, you can do. Hello, Ben Grogan. So, this is the Minotaur and Tiger classes, and the first thing we're starting off with is the cruisers up to RN cruiser experience up to 1941. What the RN cruisers were experiencing up to 1941. What was going on in their world? And a lot was going on in their world. And often, a lot of it was quite random. But before we get into that, I am going to do a quick announcement. If you have a look here, you will notice that Patron 21 and Patron 22 have been successfully chosen. We have Patron 21 on the 15th of April. Is notable World War II commanders of small naval forces, e.g. Burnett, Agnew, Sherbrooke. I'm going to pick 3 others. I'm going to talk for about 6 of them. And Patron 22, Timothy Sims. If the Cold War went hot in 1986, would NATO's navies be capable of stopping the Soviet attack subs ravaging the merchant fleet? That should be fun. Now, I hope you sort of like those, and thank you to everyone who voted. It should be fairly fun. And should be fairly interesting, although I have to admit, there's part of me which was sort of disappointed one of those didn't win, and that's why the 29th of April is currently question marks, because I am tempted to put one of the ones which didn't win into the actual videos. And you can probably have a go at guessing which one that is. So, this, believe it or not, is the first RN cruiser lost in pretty much World War II. Yes, it is HMS Curlew. It's a C-class cruiser. And this is part of the scenarios that you have going on. The RN is losing cruisers in World War II. They are losing them at the beginning of the war. But the question is, do you need to replace this and get equivalent value from another cruiser that of the types the RM will be building, or can you replace it with destroyers or a combination of destroyers and escort carriers? What's the most efficient replacement? So this is a question which the RN is asking itself throughout World War II. It can build ships. It does rapidly build carriers. It does rapidly build cruisers that it wants to build. It does rapidly build destroyers that it wants to build and has the available equipment for. But there are other ships which take their time. And tonight we're going to be talking about a class which really does take its time, and then the class which sort of comes after them. Well, there's technically was actually another, before I get into it, there's technically another cruiser which managed to damage itself first by running aground. But this is the one which is beaten up and smashed up by Ju-88s, I think. I could be getting my C-class names mixed up again. I've got to mention 3 of them today. And it's Calypso, Curlew, and Caraco. So no, that is Curlew. There were roughly 28 cruisers. Depends who you're going with. If you're including Dominion and Commonwealth ships, it's roughly 34. There are... And then there's HMS Carlisle, which is damaged by German air attack, is never repaired, and becomes a base ship in Alexandria, but is not technically lost. So I would say 28, but other people make the case 27. But I have a feeling, my view is, if it's a cruiser and you're no longer able to use it as a cruiser, it's not a cruiser anymore, so you've lost it. Banham. Alex, just tried Iron Brew for the first time the other day. Interesting taste. Pretty gay, good. Would buy again. Very good to hear. Jaren Thatcher. Hello. Nelson once said he never reckoned himself the equal to Blake. Would you agree? Lots of people say lots of self-depreciating things when they think it would look good in history. But curious enough, we'll be talking about Blake later, so I will leave that to when we get to Blake. So, Norway in the Arctic, what do they show the RN? They show the RN that they need a lot of air defense. They need a lot more presence. They do need more fighting ships. But again, you have a scenario that for much of the convoy war, you have battleships on call. Heavy cruisers, battleships, there. You don't lose that many heavy cruisers. The RN does lose some. They're not going to lose none of them, but let's be honest, the heavy cruisers they lose are Cornwall, Dorsetshire, and Exeter. Which are losses, yes. They're things the RN would prefer not to have lost. But... and York as well. And York. But they are for heavy cruisers. They've got plenty of heavy cruisers. That's why the RN doesn't build an 8-inch cruiser. They do consider an 8-inch cruiser in World War II, and they just go, well, we don't need one. Why? We've got battleships where we need something heavier than a cruiser, and where we don't have battleships, we have enough 8-inch cruisers to cover them. Okay. Then the question comes, well, when you're building 6-inch cruisers, do you need a big 6-inch cruiser, or do you need a small 6-inch cruiser? And if you need a small 6-inch cruiser, is it better served by having a couple of big destroyers? This is the equation that's going on. So the British lose the C-class cruisers. And losing C-class cruisers is not something the RN wants to do. But honestly, it's not exactly the thing which the RN has put a lot of money into. Their C-class and D-class vessels mostly become, well, the C-class definitely become AA cruisers as they sort of last longer. Which is useful. As AA cruisers, they're great, but they're hardly full cruisers anymore. That's good. Are you ever given how many places are there in the world that can dock a 400 meter long, 200,000 ton if it needs hull res after it's a little bit of foreign land? There aren't that many, but there are a few, thankfully, in not too far away from it. Alexandria has 1 or 2 spots. Jaron Thatcher. Man for man, leaving aside, who was better in World War II, the US or UK navies? Oof. Half a dozen of one and 6 of the other. RN has a lot of advantages and they're in the war for longer, but US Navy does manage to get itself into a lot of fighting power. Paul from Chicago has just put forward the US Coast Guard. I think I will go for the Royal Canadian Navy. No, I won't duck it that much. I'll just say, yeah. You can make the case for either service quite well. They both stack it up. Ian Carr, RN never went into the trouble of recommissioning Caroline. No. A lot of things they didn't do. So, this is what part of this talk is about. In that... Hi, Jeff. you have to think that these designs, these ships, are being put together in a period when the RN is honestly looking at its cruiser force and going, what justifies you? Because, yes, we can get the supplies we need. We've got Lend-Lease, I've been over that. Yes, we can use the shipyard space if we want to, but if we use the shipyard space for a cruiser, that possibly means we don't have the shipyard space for a light carrier, a light fleet carrier. Ooh, it's a tough one. And remember, they have got the Crown colonies coming in as well. So you can't forget the fact that they're coming along. You can't forget the fact that the towns have entered service just prior to the war. You can't forget that the Didos, although I have managed to skip past the Didos. You can't forget that the RN is dealing with a scenario in which it's fighting a total war. And so sometimes that means it can't do everything it wants to do. But also there's a scenarios it's finding itself fighting in, because where is the RN fighting for until 1941? Is it fighting in the North Atlantic? Yes, a little bit, but not much. Is it fighting in the Arctic? A little bit, but not much. Starting to get under there. Is it fighting in the Mediterranean? Yes. Is it fighting in the Pacific or the Indian Ocean? The areas where traditionally you need the larger cruiser-size ships? No. It's got presence out there, and it's doing things out there against surface raiders, and it's trying to deter Japan, but it isn't really out there. So we're talking about all this as we walk through it. There are a lot of slides, and there's a room for a lot of discussions. That's good. I've got to run for a bit, but I'll be back soon. Okay, just don't push yourself too hard. So, what's really interesting is when you start considering the Atlantic. What's going on there? Well, you've had the Battle of the River Plate. The RN fights a very big battle. A very big action, if you think about it from a cruiser's perspective, in that all 4 ships involved are cruisers. So let's get into the pocket battleship idea now. Just accept that the Graf Spee, like all its Deutschlands, are heavy cruisers with 11-inch guns, which does not a pocket battleship make. Let's be honest, diesel engines certainly do not a pocket battleship make. They're just not powerful enough at this point, not able to sustain high enough speed, which is why it can't get away from these. But the point is, there's a big cruiser battle. Take care, Shumi. Enjoy Model Club. And it's exactly as the RN has theorized. It's cruisers tracking down an enemy surface raider and engaging. And it's a pack of British cruisers. But again, think about it. What are the cruisers out on this station? They're the Leanders. They're HMS Exeter. Yes, there's HMS Cumberland wandering around, a bigger county-class cruiser. But these are all fairly modern, fairly new cruisers. These things get sunk. They survived this operation, do very well. The Graf Spee gets sunk, produces a threat which needs them, but they don't. Well, let's go back and let's think about it. This, she was sunk when she was part of a task force. So, this was a task force light cruiser. It was a light cruiser in a task force role. Again, do you need to replace it with another light cruiser Or can you replace it with a large destroyer? As Jeff Peeler has just rightfully pointed out, until Japan enters the war, the Irons only lost one 8-inch cruiser, HMS York. The rest they lose with Japan. All in 1941-42. And there's Canberra, which of course is Australian one, also in 1942. Did the 11-inch guns make Scharnhorst a double block battleship? No, we're not getting distracted by the 11-inch guns and the fact the Germans are obsessed with them. I feel that 6-inch gun cruisers are lost in greater numbers, hence need more replacements. Yes, but also there are a lot more 6-inch cruisers to begin with, let's be honest. There are a lot more to begin with. And as Ian Carr has pointed out, there were numerous cruiser squadrons trying to track down Grasp Bay, some of them French. Yes. But that was the whole point about how to run this sort of war. That's an anti-surface radar and sea control war, or rather sea denial war. Well, so you did use cruisers for it. And please note, the British cruisers were deployed on those stations even before they had an idea the surface raiders were out there. Because they weren't just out there hunting surface raiders. No, no, no. They're out there hunting German merchant ships as well. And Italian ones when the Italians entered the war. And French ones when the French switched sides. And a few other ones as well, which might be flying a Spanish flag or another flag, but which they didn't really think were Spanish. In other words, there were lots of things for cruisers to be doing out on those stations, and they were doing it very well. There is, of course, also Sheffield. Yeah. A critical linchpin of Force H. When that comes into being. Sheffield, of course, famously also serves as a marker point for aircraft trying to attack Bismarck. But we'll leave that to one side. Shiny Chef goes through a large chunk of the war. Those parts of the war she doesn't go through, she's usually in refit for. And she turns up in lots of places. She is your typical town class 6-inch cruiser. Which means she's heavy enough that most heavy cruisers have to think about it before engaging them. Trust me, before anyone starts saying, no, they've got 8-inch guns. Just remember some of the battles on the North Cape area, even prior to Scharnhorst losing it, where Hipper, Lutzow together decided that, frankly, the town class cruisers were not worth engaging too long. And the town class and crown colonies were definitely not worth engaging too long. There are better things to do with our time than engage these particular annoying vessels. We will go and find them elsewhere. But they're out there. They're involved. And they're doing a lot on Atlantic. In Card, do you consider 7.5-inch cruisers as heavy or light cruisers? Well, seeing as the existence of the 7.5-inch cruisers was what ended up causing the existence of the 8-inch cruiser, you have to sort of put them in the heavy category, but trust me, the Royal Navy preferred not to have them at several points. The Hawk class were interesting vessels. Oh, Effingham class. Hawk is the one of them I remember. Yeah. Interesting vessels. And in the Mediterranean, yes, that's another C class. Yes, she gets sunk as well. Check my notes because I'm just gonna already into this. That was Calypso. She was sunk on the 12th of June, 1914, by the Bagnolini, an Italian submarine of the Lisi class. So, she was sunk by a submarine. Not really what you call an anti-submarine warfare ship either, is she? Again, you have to anti-submarine warfare mission is coming in and is quite big, and this is not an anti-submarine warfare ship. In fact, if you consider in the losses of the RN in World War II, of the 28 Royal Navy cruisers, and I'm going to include Carlisle, even though I don't really include Carlisle, lost, your C class account for let's see, 2, 3, 4, 5. Account for, let's say, 2, 6 of the losses. So, that is pretty much World War I vintage cruisers account for over 20% of the losses. Yeah, they have a lot of them to lose, but there's also the fact that when you're replacing them, what are you going to replace them with? What do you need to replace them with to get a ship of the same value? That's the question. Especially in war, when every slipway matters. And every slipway does really matter. Just checking the chat's still working for me, because occasionally, as you know, it does like to freeze. Let's expand out so that people who want to get a look can get a look. They're good-looking little ships, but they are really, really little light cruisers by this point. And then you have the RN in the Far East. What are they doing till 1941? Well, they're trying to hold the Japanese at bay. And they're doing that through a twofold strategy of presence and keeping them off balance. HMS Liverpool's operation against Asamaru is a classic case of the British keeping the Japanese off balance. Yes, on one level, it's a very simple operation to stop German personnel potentially getting back to Germany and supporting their war effort. There's literally 40 of them. That's massive. That's going to make a critical difference in a war where you are literally talking in terms of the deployment of hundreds of thousands of personnel on fronts. 40. Okay, skilled merchant sailors are going to make a massive difference to the German war effort. So that's so worthwhile sending a whole town class cruiser off to wait off the Pacific coast of Japan for this to come back. No, of course not. But that does provide a useful reason for why you would intercept a Japanese merchant ship just off the coast of Japan, close enough that you are going to literally singe the Imperial Japanese Navy's beard without them being able to do anything about it, because if they react, then that's war. It's not nice. It's the kind of operation you do once or twice, and it really winds you up. And as we said, we've talked about the Tsingtao incident of the SS Vincent de Paul, and how her sister, HMS Birmingham, goes in, pulls out the SS Vincent de Paul with the help of the lovely little sloop, of course. We can't forget the little sloop. But again, these are a long line of operations, and again, they both take place in January. It's almost a year apart, and they just remind the Japanese quietly who is in charge. What the prices are. Now, you can pick it apart all you like, but the fact is the Japanese wait till the British have been fighting a war for dang near for 2 years, and have had to move considerable amounts of forces, and they know they're better quality forces, or at least they're better trained forces, and the pre-war forces, to fight in all across the rest of the world, to fight in Iran, to fight in fight in North Africa, to fight in Europe, to fight in the Mediterranean, the North Atlantic. They know the British have had to move these forces, and that gives them confidence. Hello, Ron Cash. Hello, Matsumoshi. Oh, hello. I normally don't intend lives as it's 1 a.m. at my place right now, but since who needs sleep? I'll stay for a bit. Thank you. Then, folks, could the counties and there have to be taken a triple turret like the QEs, or would they have been in the same situation as the R's could have taken triple turrets? Basically, taking a triple turret depends on the size of your turret ring and whether or not your turret ring can be expanded. If you have a broad enough beam, you can expand the turret. But you can put pretty much squeaking a treble 6-inch into an 18-inch ring. The odds are usually you have to go down a gun size to be able to squeeze a treble into a doubles ring. But that's just a rule of thumb. So basically, you talk about 15-inch and you go, yeah, but you're going to have to drop down to about 13 and a half to fit a treble in there. Probably. Maybe further. Depends on the size and the beam of the ship. And that's one of the things we'll get up to, because when we talk about the Tiger class, they're kind of like the Darings and the Battles, they're all about angles of their guns, because their guns are the first automated ones, and they need to do a full 360. They need to be able to do the full 360, so they have to design them with space for the guns to do a full 360. So any questions on about part 1? I get the impression that these and the unconverted Cs were left in charge on the China Eastern Ordinance has been good enough. Honestly, they were left out there because the British didn't have much else to go. There is a reason the British are trying to send out new ships out that direction. You know, the new ship routes tend to go, we'll go do a warm-up in the Caribbean, and then we'll go out to the East Indian Ocean. And then from there we might go into the Mediterranean fleet. So there are ships passing through. Yes, there might be routinely less heavy ships, and certainly the convoying out there is left to the Cs and the Ds. But there are usually other ships of the Royal Australian Navy and the New Zealanders wandering around out there. Ian Carr, RN had been reduced to no carriers routinely east of Suez by the end of 1941. That's definitely true, but there again, by that point, they had managed to lose Courageous, Glorious, and Ark Royal. And that's the trouble. The British start World War II with one of the world's largest, with the world's largest carrier force in service. Trouble is, during World War II, they have to actually use it. And unfortunately, they don't always get to use it the way they'd like to. But still, broadly speaking, they do have good designs. And they are working out what they can do. Inca, only troop convoys were routinely escorted in the Far East in the Russell period. Troop convoys, yeah, well, troop convoys in the Far East, even then, were starting to head towards the cruise liner route. And you have to remember, cruise liners were not really routinely escorted apart from in very high danger zones, in which case they were going at 30 plus knots. I love your ambition there, but that's not making 30 plus knots. It did when new, but no. What it is doing is escorting critical war material convoys, which sometimes do have troops as part of their convoy stuff, but they're also moving things like tanks, planes, critical raw materials to and fro places. Anyways, out of Iron Brew. Well, not really, but I thought, as it is April Fool's Day, I'd wait and see how long it took for someone to notice. Yeah, it happens. More importantly, though, I did order 2 bottles of Iron Brew and 2 bottles of Lilt because I thought it might be nice to have some Lilt in the stock. And they'd run out of Iron Brew, so yeah. Didn't get that. Anyway. Minotaur class now. And the Minotaur class are sort of interesting. Sorry, just checking on the potential arrival of the research assistant. Well, William Cox, how much of the outcome of operational planning for World War II was affected by untimely plane crashes? Sadly, too much, but not as much on the Allied side as on the Axis, because, of course, Ramsey isn't killed till after the war is almost over. Untimely, one of the things you must think, though, is if perhaps the British had managed to maintain a heavier cruiser presence in the Indian Ocean and Far East, then German surface raiders might not have captured the plans which Japanese had to, which enabled them to know pretty much where the British forces were. Now, don't take this the wrong way, because this is going to shock someone, I'm sure, when I say this. But even if I know all the equipment the enemy has, and I know what their forces are, that doesn't mean necessarily I'll be able to beat them. Because if I'm on the offensive, and they're on the defensive, and they've got half a brain in their commander who's actually running and acting as a commander, then they are going to throw things which I won't know, because I will know, yes, that is a few hundred soldiers who are barely trained. But if they have managed to use their time well, I concentrated on shooting and digging trenches around a fortified position, then when I run up against them, they're going to feel nice and safe and secure in their deep trenches and protected. And they're going to be able to start shooting me. And if a few of them manage to, it only takes a few of them to repulse one or two skirmishes, and they suddenly start to feel very confident. And they've got a nice safe position, which they've got their food in and their stuff in, and you know, they've got artillery support. All these things can make a great difference. If I spread them around like penny packets, and therefore they cannot actually dig themselves in because I'm keeping them mobile, then they tend to start getting into trouble because they are not as well trained. If you want to fight a mobile war, you need very well trained troops. If you can fight and make it into a static war, you can afford to be still training your troops. In card, Japan knew nothing about the Garcia bases, fortunately. No. No, they didn't. Anyway, Minotaur class. So, Minotaur class. Well, as you notice, they are actually slightly less theoretically in standard than the Southamptons, at approximately 8,800 tons in standard, although at least two of them were roughly 8,895 tons in standard, so in the nicest way, I'm not sure how much that is off them. They are 555 feet 6 inches. Please do look at their stats and then look at the Fijis. They are 4 Admiralty free drum boilers driving 4 Parsons geared turbines, developing 72,500 shaft horsepower over 4 shafts for a top speed of 31.5 knots, or 2,000 nautical miles at 30 knots, or 8,000 nautical miles at 16 knots. This is all on 1,850 tons of fuel oil, i.e. as much fuel oil as theoretically a Tribal class destroyer was supposed to displace in standard. This is why we like cruisers. They carry lots of fuel. Anyway, so main belt, 3.25 inch to 3.5 inch, which is, yes, less than town classes, but on par with the Fijis, probably pretty much the same as the Fijis. Deck was 2 inches, turrets are 1 to 2 inches, and bulkheads slightly more than the Fijis or Salons, because they didn't have the bulkheads necessarily, was 1.5 to 2 inches of armor. Oh yeah. Way to contain the big bangs. They had 9 6-inch guns, again, in 3 treble Mark 21 turrets, 10 quick-firing 4-inch Mark 16 guns in 5 twin mountings, and it's just beautiful the way they line them out. It is beautiful. 16 pom-poms. Ooh. Something to the right. Oh. Big fluff. Oh. I know where I rank in versions of dinner. And 6 40mm Bofors in single mounting. So you'll notice that basically the British have gone with, right then, the pom-pom has a higher rate of fire. The Beaufort has a longer range. I know what we'll do. We'll put in some single Beauforts so we get the range of the 40mm. Oh yeah. But then we'll have 4 quad pom-poms. So we'll still be able to blast them. It's basically shredding time. And still 2 treble 21-inch torpedo tubes. Yes, the RN are still pretending that their cruisers are going to start torpedoing other people. Which is possible, because basically the RN's going, we carry torpedoes to deal with enemy battleships. They give a cruiser a chance against the enemy battleship. And they do. It's not a chance most battleships would like to take, but it's a chance. And done, Freeman. Starting from the beginning, but playing at 1.75 speed. Good luck. It's a fun specs, and here's the thing, and the point I'm trying to make. The RN, yes, is often accused of just playing copy and paste with the town class. There is a reason I am wearing this lovely picture. But they do a lot of work in developing them. They know how good the town class are. Then the lovely government has the 1936 London Agreement. The Navy isn't quite sure what happens to them either. But they start building back up to it. Ben Gargan, when did the first credible anti-submarine warfare torpedoes appear? Later than this, unfortunately. They are starting to try and experiment with them in World War II, but they don't really get them into service till the 1960s. There's a bit of a, whoa, we have all the technology being researched, yay, and then it's war's ended, we can save money. And slowly it goes up again. And it gets in service. And that is the other risk. But again, you'll notice no aircraft. But she does have rather large crew. 867 in full load. Probably because of all the various turrets. All the mounts. All the guns. There's a lot of guns going on. Yes, they no longer have the 4th big turret, but they have a lot of little 40mm going around. A lot of them. And they're so pretty. And there's so many of them. Now, here is the thing. We're now talking about the Minotaur class. And unsurprisingly, none of these are lost in World War II. But there is a lot of differences between them. And one of the saddest things, I think, is Hawk gets cancelled, but we'll leave that to one side. Because, as the class was originally going to look, this was what was planned. There was going to be Minotaur, Swiftsure, Superb, Hawk, Bellerophon, which was originally Blake, then Tiger, then Bellerophon. And then there was going to be Blake, which had previously been Tiger. And then there was going to be Defense, and then Bellerophon, which had previously been Blake. And then there was Mars. Anyone who thinks that various parts of the Royal Navy had gone a little bit nutty, please know I understand and agree with you. Yes, there was a lot of chopping and changing going on the names. A lot of chopping changing the names. Dawson, airborne ASW torpedoes exist during World War II. Not really. They exist, but they're not employed. They're being developed and tested, and it takes them a while after World War II for them to actually come in the service, Peter. As far as I can see, if you can find a source which shows me a submarine, an aircraft using an aerial torpedo to prosecute a submarine in an ASW role, then I will be very happy to correct myself. But my notes, and I did just catch them because naval aviation is one of the things I look at, has those all listed as being under testing, and they're working on them, but they're not in service during World War II. Recruiter torpedoes. Besides, the iron has radar. Nothing is more rewarding than splashing a few fish in water and then getting nice fireballs in the fog or in the night. That does help. William Cox, Fido was airdropped. Safer for the Allies. Fido is technically a mine, and whilst some do call it an acoustic torpedo, no. I'm sorry. To me, Fido is not really a torpedo. It looks like a torpedo, I know, but it's a mine. That's what was designed. It's got a very limited torpedo hunter killer thing range. Anyway, that's off topic for today's discussion. So, as you can see, some of them are given pennant numbers. Some of them really laid down, and 3 are actually completed and commissioned. Minotaur becomes HMCS Ontario. She's broken up in 1960. Superb, that gets commissioned into the Royal Navy. Swifter gets commissioned into the Royal Navy. Swifter actually arrives to serve during World War II. And 4 were redesigned as Tiger-class cruisers, although only 3 of those will be built. Anyway, Superb completed with a close-range outfit consisting of 8 single 40mm Mark III, 2 single 2-pounders, 4 twin manual 20mm, and 2 single 20mm guns. Why 2-pounders when you have so many 40mm? Why not? 2-pounder. The pom-poms have a slightly higher rate of fire than the Oricons, so yeah, they do consider them instead of the Oricons. The Oricons have slightly longer range. If you can find a source. No, because I knew as soon as I say that someone would come back to me with Fido. But Fido is developed of the mines, and it's very much developed as a mine. It is not really what you would call an anti-submarine warfare torpedo. It probably is called that sometimes because of the grandfather of the anti-submarine warfare torpedo. But that's like... Sorry. Someone's having a small hissy fit next door. And I'm trying to work out whether it's in the path or behind me. It's behind me. Did Minotaurs look like crown colonies? Well, this will be the answer to that one. What do you think? Does look to me a bit like a crown colony. Definitely looks like a town class. Looks like all of them pretty much. You'll notice though that what they've done is they've changed X turret for the 4-inch guns. And so whilst they have 5 twin mounts, each side has roughly a broadside of 6. And they have capable to mount 6 firing sternwards. So they have a lot of firepower. You'll also notice that above that 4-inch gun is one of those 40mm mounts. Yes, that's where a quad pom-pom is. You'll also just notice there's another quad pom-pom as well, forward. So there's a lot of quad pom-poms. Yeah, not really. But it's a lot of stuff going on. The 5th twin mounting was worth adding. It was useful. It did provide them with a lot more firepower when it came to air defense, and it will provide them with a lot of capabilities. The funnels have changed, though, as Ian Carr has noticed. Does make a difference. But because they've got their engines far more spaced out, they've gone with a unit style system. All in all, these were far more pleasant ships to serve on than the Crown Colonies because they were slightly more spacious and slightly easier. It's amazing. Once you remove and change around the fittings for X-turret, it does make things spacious. There are no aircraft hangars because there's no aircraft. So that's another change. Hull-wise, though, fairly much there. Interesting enough, removing the hangars does reduce a lot of the top-weighted issues. Removing the need for aircraft reduces a lot of internal things you need to store, i.e. storage parts of the aircraft, storage parts of the fuel. And Peter Dawson, thanks for the book recommendation. I'll have a look it up. But she does become HMCS Ontario rather quickly. She's not even built as HMS Minotaur. In fact, she's transferred to the Royal Navy in July 1944, while she's still being built in Harwolf, Belfast. She joins the 4th Cruiser Squadron in the Pacific Theatre, but was too late to see active service, although she did take part in operations in Hong Kong, Manila, and Japan. She then went to Eskimo in British Columbia for a refit. In 1948, she, along with the destroyers Kaiga, Afghanistan, Crescent, and the frigate Antonioshi, sailed to Pearl Harbor, Hawaii, which was the first large-scale deployment of the Royal Canadian Navy after World War II. In January 1949, she took part in a large training cruise of the Royal Canadian Navy, alongside the HMCS Magnificent and Haida, Afghanistan, and the frigate Antiochi again. So she does like hanging around with the tribals. In February 1951, she took part in joint exercises with the Royal Australian Navy. And in October 1951, she took Prince Philip and Princess Elizabeth from Sydney, Nova Scotia, to Newfoundland during the royal visit to Canada. She had a nice long career, you could say, until you realize that she serves just until 1958. So she serves 14 years. And her motto, ut incepit fidelis sic pament. Loyal she has been and remains so. A good ship. And this is one of the good color photos about her. You feel like air conditioning. I don't think they got that much. Nathan, since when or which class of ships did the RN start giving sailors actual beds instead of hammocks? I visited the Belfast and it only had hammocks for regular sailors. There are hammock using ships in the Royal Navy up until the 1980s. Bunks and beds start being standard. Well, the county class have them. So basically, county class onwards, you have them as standard. Prior to that, some ships do, some ships don't. Space behind the second funnel was used for more AA guns, believe it or not. There were a lot of AA guns put in, and then we have HMS Superb. Yes, she is superbly pretty. Very, very pretty. Now, Superb doesn't manage to get commissioned in time to see any action. She is commissioned 1945 and decommissioned 1957. Remember what I said? Some of the younger ships were decommissioned early to preserve some other ships for for various reasons in the Crown colonies, because they'd spent money on the wrong ships, arguably, and because other people worried that they wouldn't get them the new ships. They're worried about protecting the Tigers. Superb has several differences to her sisters because she is the last of her class to be built. She, has Type 7275 radar sets. Unfortunately, the 275 was not necessarily as good as its American equivalents, but it did have some advantages. Trouble is, the American radar systems are being reserved for the battle class destroyers, HMS Eagle and HMS Ark-Royal, the carriers, and HMS Vanguard, the battleship, which meant that the cruisers got the British sets, which were considered not as good. They had higher tolerances and lower reliability, but they're still pretty good. They actually considered changing Superb to automatic guns, like you have on the Tiger class specifications. Because she was actually broader beamed than her sisters. She is again another modification. Remember what I said before? There is one thing which does argue that the Town class, Crown colonies, and Minotaurs, including the Tigers actually as well, are all sort of one long class being produced. It's that the willingness of the Royal Navy to modify them, quite heavily modify them. It's really the 1957 Defence Review which gets rid of her, though. Like it gets rid of her sister. Because radar is only as good as the person on the screen is and staying awake and paying attention. To an extent. Ryan Cash, that looks like a really long Citadel, or am I dreaming? It's not exactly a short one, but it's not as long as it might look. If she'd had twin auto 6 inches, that would have made things interesting. If she'd still been around. Unfortunately, she got rid of Ben Krogan in 1957. If she had been around and had the planned fitting would have been seen her fitted with, I think they'd hoped for 5 twin 3-inch guns to replace the 4-inch ones, and 3 twin 6 inches. Jack, it starts to look like today's topic classes were just as post-war tinkering ships as E-class post-World War One. Yeah, basically. In fact, you could argue the RN was tinkering around and planning on their next generation of cruiser. And certainly if you are going into Freeman's cruisers, you could really get that impression. Because the RN goes through World War II and it learns a lot of lessons. It's got to keep building while it's building, while the war's going on, because you don't know what's going to happen. You don't know what it's going to need to do. But once peace breaks out, it's sort of case of going, okay, now we want to step back. Okay, they're going to cut our budgets for bits. So what we need to have done is made sure we've tested out as many ideas as possible. So when they remove the purse string, sort of loosen the purse string bit, we can build what we need to. We can do the work we need to. And that's not easy, but it's necessary. And finally, we have Swiftsure. Dan, you just said hello with me catching up frantically. Hello, Dan. Frederick Mars. I assume they had already started work on HMS Swiftshure's reconstruction in 56 and continued work on Swiftsure after the... They continue work on her, but they don't get rid of her very quickly. Runcash, that would be an insane rate of fire with 3-inch, 6-inch loadout. What sort of RPM were those guns planned to be running at? The same as they were in the Tigers. That's the other interesting thing. So you're going to start going, but why are the Tigers as reduced as they are? Well... oh, that gets into fun times. Tigers are a peacetime, cost-effective build. There is a difference. Now, this is Swiftsure. She is pretty. She is, and this picture actually I consider the best for highlighting what they've got. You can see the fact that they are... it kind of reminds me of the battle class destroyers. In that you have a huge concentration of main battery firepower forward. And then you have lighter guns and the power systems and the bridge and the citadel, all those things. And then you have the AA batteries aft. And you have, yes, another main battery gun aft. But let's be honest, that is a huge concentration of AA firepower you have there. You've got quad 40s. You've got double 4 inches. 4 inches. There is just so much firepower there. Mm-hmm. Swiftsure had service in the British Pacific Fleet, where she was the flagship of 4th Cruiser Squadron when she was out there, the BPS. She took part in the raid on Truk, and she participated in the Sakishima Islands operations of the Okinawa campaign. And she was Admiral Cecil Harcourt's flagship for the when he took her in to secure the Japanese surrender. In Hong Kong. In 1951, she was the flagship for the 2nd Cruiser Squadron, and Swifter was updated to keep commonality with HMS Superb to an extent, but you know, she had other things going on. She had one point she had Graham Hill, the future Formula One world champion, Graham Hill, serving aboard the ship as an engine room artificer. And in 1953, she took part in the fleet review to celebrate the Queen Elizabeth's coronation. In September 1953, she had a bump with HMS Diamond, the Daring-class destroyer, which led to a fierce fire in the bridge cable trunk, and that caused trouble with her electrics. She remains inactive until the beginning of major refit in February 1937 at Chatham Dockyard, which was to bring her up largely to the standard of the Tiger class, but unfortunately she was too narrow in terms of beam to have the auto-loading guns fitted. They are, you know, they felt they could fit the 3-inch guns, but didn't think they could fit the 6-inch ones. Trouble is, there is a view that starts to go around the government at this time that cruisers are an obsolete technology. That you don't need cruisers in the modern thrusting world. And as refit starts to get expensively slow, and the hull is discovered to have compressed more than 18 inches under the weight of the new bridge, requiring many stanchions to be internally fitted to prevent further collapse on the new structure. As it was a new structure, I was fitted to Belfast, but Belfast was holding up far better. They end up with getting rid of her. She is considered at one point for conversion to a Sea Slug missiles or a helicopter carrier, and you know, the Admiralty up until 1960 was still considering Swifter one of its few modern and modernized cruiser hulls, and were considering lots of different options for it until they had to get rid of it. But the fact is, many people were turned against cruisers by this point, and as beautiful and as lovely as she was, and as capable as she no doubt could have been with refits, there were issues with her. You know, as said, she required a lot of work to take the new structure they were putting in that was similar to what Belfast had done, but Belfast survived it far easier, which suggests that perhaps the construction that had taken place on her hull during wartime had been slightly more rushed than the Town class had been pre-World War II. Very much. The point is that they simply hadn't started work on Superb by the Sandys Review, and post-war RN officers in the steam era, like rail engines, some of the class would be good, others good. Variation yards? That was not so good. Variation yards. Yeah, there's all sorts of things going on. Hello, Fercula. Bangor compressed by over 1.5 feet. That sounds like a horrifying thing to realize is happening. Well, actually, and this is one interesting thing, is because I know a little bit more about Swifter and her work than I do about some of the others, because, as it would help, one of my dad's best friends was working on her at the time. And to save money, because they did a hull inspection beforehand, And one of the senior architects said, "Oh, we should do this. We should put in stanchions before we put in this structure because it's going to be a lot heavier than the existing citadel structure." And one of the other ones who said, "Well, you know, these classes, they're just modified towns, aren't they? And it's worked fine on Exeter, on Belfast." "Yeah, it has." "Well, then it'll be fine. We don't need to do this, but it's different." No, it's worked fine on Belfast." Wow. Now, there are two things which are different when you consider Belfast construction. One, she's designed with the requirements of having a hangar up on the main deck level, and the catapult, which are very heavy things, lots of aircraft, lots of fuel. So she's built a lot stronger internally anyway to take that amount of top weight being put up there. Secondly, and this is for all the will and the best will in the world, she's a lot bigger and a lot heavier and a lot more densely built. She's HMS Belfast. She's the largest variation of town-class cruiser you get. Even if the Citadel you'd wanted to sit on it had been proportional, it would have still caused trouble. Trying to sit a Citadel which was pretty much damn near identical, and you end up with a lot of problems. Hello, Kilo 19. In car, lack of transom stern swifter wouldn't help for a helicopter pad. No. They would have had to do something about that. And then Peter around. The amount of crew needed to crew a cruiser was a problem post-war and wasn't cost-effective in that government's eye. No, that was part of the problem. But, again, you have to consider the government was sitting there thinking, what do we need cruisers for? What are cruisers for? They are for independent cruising. But do we send ships out independently? That was the question of the government. The idea was, well, we all got ships need air defense. It's one of those interesting things. You have a feeling that if Britain had retained cruisers in service slightly longer and slightly more numerously, then the odds are Britain would have had a missile cruiser come into service. And the RN kept making the case for a missile cruiser because they needed a ship with it. Because, again, the size of missiles at this time, they needed quite a big ship to take a lot of missiles. As Shawmek says, I love the "it'll be fine" response. It's one of my favourites. It's so many of our favourites. That went the wrong way. So that was the Minotaurs. They're cute ships. They really are. So what have we got coming up? RNZN introduced all bunks bed on its two Rossays, Artaga and Taranaki commissioned in 61, and the all bunks and cafeteria missing were carried on the RN Leander design. Yes. But let me put it this way. They are, but the question was, when the RN stop having using hammocks? And again, with the Alander class, I have a fair number of friends who told me that they ended up in hammocks on those because of them having various issues sometimes. So, yeah. In car, was HMS Bristol the Type 82 in reality a missile cruiser? I'm going to hold that question till section 5. Oh, Right, so cruises with a British Pacific, and let's just quickly do this. What have we got coming up? Well, today is, of course, Minotaur and Tiger class cruises, and the appropriate long patrol will be coming out shortly. Bruce Ships 44 Strategy is on Sunday. The Battle of Saints are next Thursday. The Bruce Ships 45, something medieval, is on the 11th. Patron 15th April, Patron 21 in Car, notable World War II commanders. 18th of April, Bruce Ships 46, Accounts of Naval War. 22nd of April, Patron 22. It worked out rather well, that one. Timothy Sims, if the Cold War went hot in 1986, would NATO's navies be capable of stopping Soviet attack subs ravaging the merchant fleet? That's a rather interesting one to get into. And 25th of April, Age of Sail. And Imperial Noir. Would Tigers have been possible to fit with the missiles instead of the conversion to command cruiser? They were fitted with missiles as part of the conversion to command cruiser. They had sea slugs fitted. I'm just going to sit here looking. Sea slugs fitted. Yeah, sea slug. Downstream and catch up. Hello, I will catch you. I'm glad. Oh, right then. So, Swistra made it to the British Pacific Fleet, and this is her. I think it's in. Let me just check. This is her entering Victoria Harbour on the 30th of August 1945 from North Point. And of course, Victoria Harbour is Hong Kong. So that was nice. The Royal Navy was returning to Hong Kong on a cruiser which honestly had barely been laid down when it was lost. That's a nice thing for Britain to do. It's quite good. But you have to sit there and think about it going, so these are the last two war cruisers that they've actually built. Yes, Ontario technically is the third, so yeah, but she goes off to the Canadians. Swistra and Superb are the last two of the wartime cruisers. Last two of that legacy. Sea Cat, yeah. Oh, Sea Cat or Sea Slug? Sea Cat, I think, actually. I'm not sure if you're right or wrong. I think it was Sea Slug that was fitted. We'll check when we get to my notes then. Frederick Mills. Their first RN electric cruiser turret was apparently for one of Diadem's 1944 5.25 inch. And the alleged greater complexity of electric turret was why the RNZN rejected Diadem instead of Black Prince in 1946. Yes and no. Yes and no. Yes, that's the first, and we'll be getting into that, but it's actually not the same, quite the same as the later turrets the British will be putting into the cruisers. And honestly, the RNZ rejected Diadem instead of Black Prince for many, many, many reasons. There were many things wrong with that hull. Ranakash, the wife called that one before you said where it was. How can she recognize how Hong Kong before she was even born? It's a pretty place. Sea Cat is an almost hand-loadable. Sea Slug is the flying phone pole with 4 monster boosters. Yeah, I think this might have been Sea Cat then. I'm not sure. I will find out when I get them. Honestly, today was a lot of missiles. And they're all named C something. Again, you know, there is part of me which wants to do understand that. And can I please actually make this heartfelt plea to the Royal Navy? Can you stop putting C in front of your missile names? Okay? We get it. You're a naval service. But let's talk about this. You've had Sea Slug, Sea Cat, Sea Wolf, Sea Dart, Sea Viper, Sea Scepter. Just because you are a navy doesn't mean you need to put C in front of every missile. It confuses the out of dyslexic historians and even normal historians who don't have that particular issue. Everyone finds it confusing. Why? Why you know... Are you worried that someone else is going to go, what? You know what? I want to claim that missile slug is for the army. Because I have a feeling the army will not want the slug missile. No one will want the slug missile. Cat missile, maybe. That sounds like it's cool. Viper, probably. Dart, possibly. Wolf, most certainly. Scepter, they're already getting it. And it's literally going to be called Land Scepter. See what you have started? If the Air Force calls theirs the Air Scepter, I am literally chucking a can of baked beans at the heads of each of these services. Sea Skewer, yeah, the helicopter-borne anti-surface ship or something. There's a few of them. There's Sea Eagle as well, which was another anti-thing. Not to mention all the planes have C in that have C in front of them, and then there is the Seafire because reasons. Yeah, not even the Sea Spitfire, the Seafire. So, the British Pacific Fleet. It's a cruiser force in so many ways, because the RN is turning up and dealing with both King, Halsey, and a strong thread of US Navy personnel not really wanting the Royal Navy around because they want to claim their victory for themselves, because it's been a big freaking fight. It's been a tough one. They want that victory. They want it unopposed. They don't want anyone else to be able to claim it because they've got it. They fought the hard miles. This is why it's always so much just so interesting to consider. What would have happened if Operation C had turned out differently? If Somerville's Night Strike had actually made contact with the Japanese and sunk something? The whole World War II could get very bitter at certain points between certain elements of the US Navy and the Royal Navy. Probably not. Probably did work quite well together, but there'd be probably like going, you stole our ships, which we were supposed to sink. Ben Grogan, we had that on tape now. No walking back on the beans from us. No, but that means they need to stop naming things C. And if Air Scepter happens, there really is going to be... It doesn't. Yeah, the Tiger Cat was almost adopted by the army. Yeah. I never said I was going to salt and tin can. I said I was going to chuck baked beans at them. And the tin can and the can of baked beans at them. The baked beans, the can I might have already opened. So basically, it'll be me in a press conference with a can of baked beans and a can opener going... And then they announce the name. Dan, you're losing the stern chase. I'm not really trying to race anywhere, Dan. But keep going. William Cox, navalized. It's got a hole in the middle. There's sort of saying, if I see fire on a ship, I'm sounding alarm. Oh. Pretty much. From 1950s to 1970s, it seemed as if a structural reconstruction wasn't started within 12 years of a cruiser frigate first commissioning. The cost increased enormously, so the Liverpool mod rejected. Yes and no. To an extent, some of the ones from prior World War II had a lot of damage. And it was found that some of the repairs which had been done as well as they could be during wartime were not as successful as necessary they should have been for you to be able to do within a reasonable cost limits, an upgrade. It makes some sense for a navalized land plane, but no sense for something which was designed for the sea in the first place. Agreed. Hello, Henry Milner. Don't worry. William Cox, I'm amid some surprise that Ferry never commissioned a ferry. Jeff Beeler, Sea Lightning instead of 35C. Do not give them the idea. Oh, hello, Carl Harmon. Next missile series, the Sea Blackburn. Oh, good lord. Gotcha. There was an Airceptor, because however it became ASRAM because using SAMs as AMs is stupid. We can hope. We can hope. So, the Royal Air Navy ends up with quite a lot of cruisers in the Pacific for reasons. Most of those reasons were good ones, mostly. If they renamed that can of beans the sea beans or the sea can, then there would be another can coming behind it. And remember, while I'm talking about this, I am still taking name suggestions for the poll, which I'll be doing for the name of the office when it's finished. Latest suggestion from my very, very capable builder was the Iron Blue Lodge. Right then. So, cruisers you have in the British Pacific Fleet. Leander class, HMZS Achilles, yes! Rather nice link back to the Battle of the Plate. She's still wandering around and going, hello, have you met my 6-inch guns? They're really friendly. HMS Belfast, going, hello, I seem to remember you met my elder sisters, Liverpool, Birmingham. Yes, I'm here to make sure you don't forget them. Dido class, Argonaut, Black Prince, Eurydice. Then it's the Crown class, Bermuda, Gambia, Newfoundland, Ontario, Uganda. And then the Minotaur class, Swifter. And then, because we also like having something which basically will charge in at 40 knots and will get really, really close to you and cause you trouble, Apollo, Ariande, and Manxman. Oh. Manx, Darius Rodolski, was he related to Friendly Vickers 14-inch gun salesman? There were a few of those out there. A few. Just going, hey, look at our 14-inch guns. Aren't they friendly? Ian Carr, Maxman had done particularly well to survive the Pacific service. She did keep trying not to survive the Pacific service, but was doing quite well. Jamila, were the post-World War II reconstructions too complex to be practical, i.e. switching from DC to AC, or bridge structures too heavy for the hull, or previous damage insufficiently surveyed? It was a combination of all the above. Plus, and here is the other problem, governments trying to go for the cheap option. It was... The Navy would tend to bring the government, and the Minister of Navy would tend to bring to the cabinet three options: the cheap option, the middle option, and the very expensive option. And they'd always try and go the cheap way. And the trouble is, the cheap way was usually cheap because you were skipping a few steps and hoping that everything and relying on it working. And it's interesting to note that the ones which worked, the ones which actually did deliver on cost and on time and on budget, were the ones which were actually the medium option was chosen. Shomak, if Japan wasn't feeling the squeeze of naval blockade, the Japanese surely would certainly start to feel it when they had the O-class started laying mines. Oh, they were having fun. You have to remember, though, there are two reasons for sending all these ships. One is to give the British presence. Now, that sounds like a weird thing to bring up in wartime. Normally, when I'm talking about presence, I'm talking about deterrence. But when you're dealing with Britain in the Pacific War, in World War II, there is a reason the British Pacific Fleet is sometimes called the Forgotten Fleet. There is a reason that Burma is sometimes called the Forgotten War. There is a reason that history seems to overly obsess with American carrier battles in the Pacific and the fighting in Europe. That stuff sells movies. It really does. The trouble is, as we're getting into this week's bilge pumps, there are issues. There are issues with trying to think history is so straightforward. It's like when someone turns around to me and says, well, carriers have never successfully operated in the face of such heavy area denial as we now face in the South China Sea. And I sit there and look at them and go, Mediterranean, the entire freaking World War II. Okay. Oh, no. Okay. Technologically speaking, equivalently, that was the same. Oh, but no, we have that as ballistic missiles. Well, if they fire a ballistic missile, that's a ballistic missile. In the nicest way, that the trouble is once you launch those, you don't have a problem in that you have to hope that the person on the other end of the radar screen correctly identifies that as a ballistic missile, which is going to kill their carriers rather than a ballistic missile which is going to wipe out their cities. And hopefully they figure it out within at least 5 to 10 minutes, because if they don't and they do an auto launch, you've just triggered a global nuclear war, and we're all going to end up in a park, living in a parking lot of glass factories. and followed by a nuclear winter. It's really not a good time. So, if you're facing a large, if you're sort of going, okay, yes, but it's a huge number of missiles. True, but they were facing a huge numbers of aircraft. But we have, but it's more missiles than aircraft. And go, well, yes, but we have far better air defense weapons now than we did then. It all adds, it evens out. It's pluses and minuses, but broadly speaking, there is a lot of history to learn from. And there is also history to learn from in the British Pacific Fleet. Because, despite it being forgotten, it does a very big role for the Royal Navy and for Britain as a whole. Because whilst there might have been certain Americans who were less interested and less keen to have the British out there than others, interesting enough, the ones who were actually responsible for committing massive operations, which would involve large numbers of people dying, were often more keen on having the British out there than not. The British being out there meant the British didn't lose face. They were going to lose a certain amount of face anyway. Unfortunately, the moment Singapore happened, the moment that you had to have Lend-Lease, the moment that Britain suffered the losses it did in World War II, meant, whilst I don't necessarily agree with the with the view of people that Hitler said, that whatever happens, the British Empire will be dead after World War II, after this war is over. Yeah, no. In the nicest way, the British have been decolonizing for a while, but we'll leave that to one side. And again, that wasn't out of the goodness of their hearts. Please, no one try and say that they were decolonizing out of the goodness of their hearts. They weren't. That was in simple economics. They were trying to keep hold of the economic product of the nations and keep them tied into them with imperial preference, whilst removing themselves from having the burden of paying for their administration. That was a British version of decolonization. It was, but it was, still. Anyway, the thing is, if you're not there, you've got no leg to stand on. If you're not at the part of the event, you have no control, no influence. Why do cruisers matter? Well, what are the ships that are most easily detached from your force and integrate into other task forces? Cruisers. What are the ones which are most easily to guard on solo operations and turn up places? Cruisers. Cruisers are useful. I don't know. Go back to cruisers. And basically, it's about diplomatic presence. Even in wartime, the cruisers are a useful asset. Okay. There is what I was thinking. They should have added 20% to the cheap option and all others get the medium in disguise. Probably. Sure, wait, if you encourage people to deliberately underbid, there will be cost overruns and delays. Yeah, humongous ones. Bengrong, you mean when things are putting in realistic budgets, then that take into account likely costing and timescales, you get a closer result than the cheap tap that promises the world. Yes. Lionheart, X-ray. I love American carriers, but even I'm like, yes, I would like to know more about the other carriers. The Mediterranean is an interesting area. William Cox, the Allies should have taken the Dalmatian coast and stood on the beach. Yeah. Was there any pressure by British on the Royal Canadian Navy to keep HMS Ontario named Minotaur to keep up the morale in Britain and for tradition? No. Shomack, they also didn't have SAMs in World War II, so defending against air attack was a little more difficult. And radar wasn't that great or universal. And then, once in a blue moon, you actually have military programs under budget and deadline. Probably because it was a mature systems iteration and there was someone with a bat hitting those who tried mission creep, the mission creep the project repeatedly. I have volunteered my services to be the person wielding the bat. The rat has offered himself to be the person who holds them in place. Keys to Singapore. Yes, again, there are, as we've been over the fall of Singapore, there are many options. You basically just need someone in charge. There are lots of good people out there, but they're all running around not sure who's in charge and who has what powers, and you need to actually have a CNC. William Cox. Britain recognised that a worldwide trading empire required free will cooperation. Guided will, I think, would be the expression they'd probably use. And almost the one thing you can say about trade history is that the next war would be different in ways no one knows in advance. Yep. Sharmak, but they did have to deal with similar thing in terms of kamikaze. Yes, kamikazes versus missiles. Kamikaze. I think the US even considered suicide planes used against them pre-Pearl Harbor. I appear to have caught up. I now feel the need to experiment along the lines of Spaceballs scene, where they find video to the film. Captain Seafort and HS-193 and Fritz X, which effectively were standoff weapons. Yeah, effectively. Inca, less RN action in the ocean in later period of war would, in my opinion, have caused more nations to have communist issues than Malaya and Malaysia and Vietnam post-war. Possibly. Hello, Yikas. So, this is the Sakishima Islands. Now, you'll consider those, they're on their way to Okinawa and various other places. They're actually these islands, not too far from modern Taiwan. Okay, these are the Sakishima Islands. And Britain is basically given the lead. Yes, they alternate with the Americans, with an American task group, but for 82 days, this place is under constant bombardment. There are rumors more high explosive is used against the airfields there to stop them launching attacks against the American forces attacking Okinawa and all those things. Than is put into Iwo Jima. The 6-inch cruisers get in really close and blast away as hard as they can. The destroyers do the same. Almost every night they are doing various operations and blasting away. The aircraft carriers are doing air raid after air raid after air raid after air raid, and it's 82 days of constant. Think about that. 82 days of constant operations. Constantly maintained operations. Next time someone tells you, oh, we've done a really good thing, we've kept these operations going for this period, we've kept constant operations, just think about that of 82 days. Think about the logistics, the size of force you're dealing with. So it goes back into the Falklands and the British doing there, but there is a reason why the British forces in the Falklands, the logistics officers, are quite a lot of them are trying to look up the feats of the work of the British Pacific Fleet. Do you hear that? How much a better command ship were the Minotaurs compared to the KGVs and the carriers? Compared to the carriers, they were great. The carriers didn't really have much command space built into them. It was something which was planned for the next generation of carriers. And curiously enough, Vian, after this time in the Pacific Fleet, goes aboard HMS Unicorn and has a look round her. And he's been commanding from, I think it's Illustrious and then Formidable, which caused enough problems when he had to move from one to the other. because Formidable wasn't sent up for a staff at all, but he needs to be on a carrier. And he ends up, for some reason, on Unicorn. And one of the things he comments is he realizes that Unicorn actually had space which could have been used as a flag bridge. Actually had the space there. And no one's quite sure why Unicorn had been built that space. It had just been included with the design. And you sort of sit there and go, But Unicorn had been used as a test for many things, and so she'd had space added into her. And possibly it was just general space which had been built in because it was felt that she was going to be part of this control and all these things, so she might need extra space up in the bridge areas for various reasons. Who knows? But the fact is, the British carriers were not really fitted out for a flag staff or a flag operations. And arguably you could go to and say that the first British carriers to ever be fitted out for really a command staff operation are the Queen Elizabeth class that have just recently come into service. They're the first ones where you can honestly go, yes, you unequivocally are designed to command a task force. There again, they're still not the best command ships probably in the Royal Navy, because I would say that's Albion and Bulwark, which have humongous command space. I mean, literally, from Albion or Bulwark, you could probably run a global war for the US armed forces, let alone the British ones. William Cox, radio intercept infrared with interfered with guided bombs. Oh yeah, they had all sorts of fun going on there. Frederick Miles, superb Swifter, logical refit, 4 Admiralty N5 for 62, 6 L70 40mm, surely. Ryan Cash, the later naval bombardments are D-Day dimes a million. They're interesting. Cox, optical infrared guidance was another diversion of German effort. They were always on the verge of a breakthrough. Always. Weren't the airfields made of coral sand and thus man with a broom was required to fix the damage? Why do you think they had to do quite so much damage? They were slightly more than that, but you know. Treasure Mars. Surely the M-class destroyers should have an equal rate with the tribal battle and the awesome 4.7-inch twin turret resigned post-World War II with its 60-pound shells. Not really. William Cox. Very much. The redesigned M-class with twin 4.7-inch 70% elevation should surely have been used in the battle daring county turret. Yeesh. Tempting, but you know, the British were sticking with a 4.5. It offered, they felt, a better return for their investment. Chris Locker, hello, afternoon all. Thought this was scheduled for tomorrow. Did I set a bad reminder? No, it's always usually scheduled for Fridays, for Thursdays. Sorry. It's usually Armchair Admirals on Fridays, or sometimes Drac does a live on a Friday. Spruance tended to have cruiser flagships, not battleships like Halsey. Yeah, the British tended to stuck with battleships mainly because they needed the status when they were dealing with their American counterparts, who were still concentrating pretty much most of their fleet in the Pacific theatre, and the Royal Navy was still spread out in Europe, doing its operations there, in the South Atlantic, in the Mediterranean, in the Indian Ocean, and in the Pacific, in the British Pacific Fleet. That's the things. If you could have combined the Eastern Fleet with the British Pacific Fleet and brought in much of the strength which was still needed for the home fleet and Mediterranean fleets, even though they didn't have many capital units in them, the British Pacific Fleet would have been absolutely colossal, and they would have been probably on an equal footing with the Americans, and could have probably commanded from cruisers. And knowing someone like Philip Vian, who had commanded from cruisers, he would quite happily have shifted to a cruiser. Ian Carr, UK plan to use Fearless and Intrepid for command control from the 1960s? Not really. Fearless and Intrepid's command situation... I think Michael Clapp said it best in his interview with us for Christmas, which he did with him and Julian did, where he said the command and control center on Fearless and Intrepid was designed for about 6 to 12 people, and none of them probably to be standing up to full height if you were him. So yeah, not really the best space to command things from. They did some work on it after Falklands War, I think, but it was never massive. Albion and Bulwarks is truly ginormous. All those German projects had always seemed just short of a breakthrough, and none of them that weren't going anywhere. Really makes you wonder. Yeah. There is a constant history in World War II, when you're studying World War II history, a constant vein of the Germans were always these technologically advanced, really great superhumans, and you're sitting there going, really? No. Don't worry, Crazy Locker. Aim for 7 hours. I think if you aim for less than 8 hours, then really you're not giving Drac enough of a task. Really, he could do 8 hours. I think Admiral King's point of view was the British Pacific Fleet would be useful, but only if it was self-supporting. Then it would be really useful as an independent force. I think Admiral King's point was to try and make it say it had to be self-supporting, was to try and make it as difficult as possible for the British to come out there, because, as I said, he had fought all this war, he wanted the glory for the US Navy because he had to fight the post-war budget battles with the Congress. So you can understand him on that front. But as it was, the US Navy gave BPF a lot of support, and the BPF gave the US Navy a lot of support. And a lot of alcohol. Alvin, big problem with the German quality control was that starting slave labor is not well motivated to workforce in such matters. Interesting that can be overstated. Dan Freeman, it's like cooking a frog in a saucepan of water. Build up slowly rather than going straight to the max. Hopefully we can have Drac and thus Clark providing 24/7 naval history. Only after we finish building this office. Cox, by definition, cruiser is a general jack of all trades warship. I think cruisers would make a better command ship in a war zone where the friendly skies are in contest. So what have we got coming up in terms of long patrols? Well, we've got the 6th of April, Monitors of the Royal Navy, Section 3. 13th of April, K-class submarines, which is, of course, for Melanie 1640, I think she was who asked for that one. 20th of April, Dreadnoughts from Around the World, 1905 to 1914. 27th of April, Extended Patron 20. Sino-Japanese War of 1894, naval and land operations, fighting the modern war with feudal societies, Jeff Beeler. 4th of May, Monitors of the Royal Navy, Section 3. 11th of May, Extended Patron 21. In Car, notable World War II small naval forces, and can probably add some more into that than we do in the live. What were some examples of a more sophisticated weapon control and integration of command and control and AI developments towards operational and control fighting ships in the Minotaurs? Not really as much as you think. If we go back quickly to the Minotaurs, one thing you'll notice very quickly, they still have open bridges. And the reason they have the open bridges is they are still relying, to an extent, on visual identification of targets. Anyway, so that's the Tiger class. And I wait for Drac doing a castle in a shed while you swear and suck a finger in the background. We're both too good for that one. More likely we'd be covered in paint. So, believe it or not, this is the Tiger class. And I know it's blank up there. I have no idea why Tiger isn't showing up. It is where I've written it. It's on the PowerPoint in front of me, but it's not on the slide in front of you. I have no idea why. $9,550 tons in standard. So these are finally bigger than the Southamptons. Woohoo! But they're still technically 1,000 tons lighter than Belfast or Edinburgh. They are 11,700 tons in full. Woohoo! But that means they're only 350 tons more than the Southamptons. They're only 570 tons more than the Minotaurs. And they are a whopping, and I say this with politeness in my heart, a whopping 1,475 tons lighter in full than the Edinburghs. What is going on here? Greetings, Animal 16365. I had a few role-playing game sessions, not the latex, the pen, paper, and dice type, spanning over 12 hours, but even if it was only like 6 hours of talk, it took meg days to get arrested, and it was decades ago. JPL, how did Swifter and Superb manage to miss the Korean War? Basically they had town-class cruisers out there, and so they didn't send them out there. So, dimensions. 555 feet, 6 inches. So they are the same length as the Minotaurs, the same length as the Fijis. They are shorter than the Edinburghs, and they are shorter than the Southamptons. They are by far the fattest of all our ships at 64-foot beam. The Edinburghs are 63 feet, 4 inches. They also had the deepest draft, coming in at 23 feet, or 7 meters. Once again, it is 4 Admiralty free-drum boilers driving 4 Parsons geared turbines, developing 80,000 shaft horsepower over 4 shafts for a top speed of 31.5 knots, or 8,000 nautical miles at 16 knots. So pretty similar to the stats for the Minotaurs, but slow as far as their designers were concerned. Main belt, pretty much the same as the Minotaurs. All that's the same, apart from the Tigers. Oh yeah, the Tigers. This is going to make you feel good. They have engine rooms and magazines covered with a 2-inch crown of armor. Yeah, that's going to keep you safe. And then they have 4 quick-firing 6-inch Mark N5s in 2 twin Mark 24 6-inch gun turrets. and 6 quick-firing 3-inch Mark N1 guns in 3 twin Mark 6 turrets. No torpedoes. No aircraft till conversion. And again, it's also cut out the crew numbers for some reason, which was about 700 and something. So, the Tigers. Jeff Hillam, how did... I'll answer that one. Wow, what an ideal. Paintball rounds for ship gunnery training battles. Sure, always makes me wonder, when the difference between standard and full load displacement, the RN surely would never hide an ammo that they plan to have in combat? Well, if you consider that part of that difference is probably, well, you have to remember the difference is they have to include fuel, but they don't have to include water. Oh, no, they don't have to include water and fuel, do they? So, yeah, that's basically 2,150 tons worth of fuel and water. They can take on 1,850 tons of fuel. German crown, so no side, just top armor? Pretty much. They had the belt, which protected their sides, and then they were fairly strong bulkhead level protection, but they also had a crown over them. But let's be honest, the Tigers are... You see, because they are built on a town class, what is basically a cut down town class hull. That's what they're being built on, let's be honest. They are evolutions of the Crown Colony, of the Minotaurs. This is the Tiger class. People compare that to a town class. I don't treat it as a town class, though, and I think it's wrong to compare them to the town class. Yes, they are big, but they're not as big as the biggest town classes. And there's a reason for that. These are not the town class successors. These are the Leander class, possibly even the Arethusa class, if you really want to be successors. I do not look at the Tiger class and think, you are the leading edge of a cruiser force. You are as cruiser can be in this period. Because it isn't. It really isn't. Let's be honest, if they had flipped the gun arrangement round and put the two 3-inch wing turrets forward, put another double 6-inch turret in the B position, and then put the 3-inch turret from B position back in X position, then you might start having a case, because they'd have 6 rapid-firing 6-inch guns, and they could sort of start to rank in there with the bigger cruisers from World War II. But they can't with 4. So what are these ships? What is their purpose when they're being built? They're being built because the RN needs placeholders for cruisers in this force. It's looking already at the missile-armed cruiser, and it needs something. It also wants these guns out there because it is running short of World War II era cruisers because they are starting to show their age. And it's cheaper to finish off the hulls which they've had sitting on the shipyards for yonks than it is to do something else with them. Interesting. By March 1944, Defence and Blake were all but signed off for transfer to the Royal Australian Navy to be completed as 5.25-inch gun cruisers. And I've also read they're all but signed off to be transferred to the Royal Indian Navy, to the Royal South African Navy, all sorts of people. I think the Royal Australian Navy were the furthest along, but yeah. That belt looks very short. Magazines only? They have it along the whole thing. Right, so the Tiger class. HMS Tiger was originally, it would cost nearly 13 million. She'd been built by John Brown Shipyard, and she's originally ordered under the 1942 Additional Naval Program. She's laid down in the 1st of October 1941. She's launched on 25th of October 1945, and is only commissioned on the 18th of March 1959. She's decommissioned on the 20th of April 1978. As completed, well, theoretically, these ships are about providing air defense to aircraft carrier task force and convoys. They were seen as playing a sort of secondary and complementary role to light fleet carriers in defense of trade and attacking enemy shipping, and a critical role in protecting the larger aircraft carriers. To an extent, they were actually reconstructed. They weren't, and this is going to sound strange, they weren't just there as construction. They are built and then they are reconstructed almost as they've been built. And it's a huge amount of work. And later on, they'd have a conversion when they'd end up with 6-inch gun, retaining one of their 6-inch guns, one of their 3-inch sets, the forward ones, and then would gain 2 Seacat quad missile launchers. Oh, whoopee-doo. Plus the ability to carry 4 Wessex or 4 Sea King helicopters. You know. After completion, Tiger went on flag-showing visits to Guinea, Stockholm, Kiel, and Antwerp. And then at the end of 1959, she deployed to Mediterranean for a year as flagship of the Mediterranean Fleet. It took them about a couple of years to overcome the teething troubles of the 3-inch armament. But the ship was still having a difficulty in achieving sustained bursts of fire with the 6-inch guns. And it was planned to resolve this after her first refit at the end of 1960. Actually, at one point, there was a senior visit aboard her. And the Naval Secretary, Rear Admiral Frank Twiss, made the unpardonable error of shooting down a very expensive target aircraft to the cheers of the ship's company, but to a stinging rebuke of the Lordships of the Admiralty, who'd wanted to save that aircraft, especially the First Lord of the Admiralty, Lord Carrington, who was with him at the time. She took part in operations in the Far East, the Indonesian confrontation, and then the Royal Navy starts to suffer manpower shortages. which meant there was a shortfall in technical personnel on Tiger, and that means items equipment cannot be operated. Specifically, some of the more technical stuff, like their guns and radars. In 1963, the Glasgow Herald describes her as virtually a floating office. And in 1964, Harold Wilson criticized the government for what they were doing with these cruisers during a speech at Plymouth. I can't think why a leader of the opposition making a case for himself to be elected as Prime Minister would, in Plymouth of all places, would make a huge song and dance about the quality of a cruiser. She would actually, in 1966, she hosted talks between Prime Ministers Harold Wilson and Ian Smith of Rhodesia. This was after the latter had unilaterally declared independence from Britain due to Britain's insistence on the removal of white minority rule before independence. "20 officers had to be put ashore, including 12 midshipmen, at Gibraltar before the talks to make room for the free delegations of the Prime Minister, the Governor of Rhodesia, and Mr. Smith." Ay, caramba. And as said, she is converted to a helicopter carrier and decommissioned in 1978. I will get into more of the decommissioning point later on. Pigeon, hello. They're destroyer by modern standards. I'd go with 8 4.5-inch and 4 twin turrets plus sea midships. An AA cruiser. The Tigers were the smallest hulls viable for the auto twin 6-inch turrets, and only 2 of that, below by Korean Suez. Lionard X-ray. So they're an economic cruiser to fill in needed ships. Pretty much. Animal 16365. I wonder if the Royal Navy should have developed a rapid 5.25-inch instead of the rapid 6-inch to save weight. They went with 6-inch because honestly the 6-inch was more useful for land for anti-ship and land operations, but could do well as well on air defense. It was felt if it was firing fast enough and could have a high enough angle. Sherman, I wonder if there would be a reason to play up how powerful your navy almost was in modern battles. Just an idle thought. Wasn't the Tiger rear 600-inch turret this high because of 360-degree rotation? Yeah, exactly. It allowed it to get all the way around. That was the important thing for all of them. And if you my father told me the quick firing 6-inch Mark in 5 gun jammed a lot. They had lots of problems. They did. And impressive miles. Were they supposed to act as radar pickets for the carriers? To an extent, yes. Hello, Trent. Twitter is saying the Russians are moving bridging equipment into Donbass and Crimea, with not a rail car to be had in Russia proper. Sounds like they're going after the water canals, doesn't it? That's what you need bridging capabilities for in that area. Sounds like it. Might not. There are other options. They could be going on a far longer sweep operation. Kahaman, when will the RN give their large ships 3 to 4 diplomatic cabins for talks? When someone planks up the money. We hope how Dr. Clark will describe how the auto 6-inch spat out brass. We will do. But this is why I have lion pictured here. Instead of picture of lion, I have lion a la this way. So, I can talk more about them. Now, as you can see, there is a lot of space around these guns. There is a reason for a lot of space. They had to be able to turn 360 degrees. Why? Because they moved so fast they thought they would hit the freaking superstructure. Yes, you heard that right. They moved so fast they thought they would hit the superstructure. Which isn't too bad, but... And I have the glorious Norman Freeman here to talk about this, and I will quite happily read it out from him because, well, it's in here and it's right. The new mountings could train at considerable speed. 38 degrees a second for the 6-inch, 60 degrees a second for the 3-inch. Hence would build up considerable momentum. To stop clear of the superstructure, they would have to slow down well before reaching that point. Overall performance would suffer badly. DNO suggested that they be placed so they could train 360 degrees, i.e. could not collide with the superstructure or with each other. With so few gun mounts, each was much more important. Hence should have clearer arcs. This idea was reflected not only in the Tiger class, but in the 1960 cruiser studies produced at about the same time. The requirement presented some problems because the 6-inch turrets were located above the magazines originally provided for the single-purpose 6-inch guns of the earlier designs. However, the forward 3-inch mount could be moved aft. Its after arcs would be more constricted. In theory, the bridge structure, foremast funnel set, could be moved about 12 foot aft to clear its after arcs, but that would require considerable effort, including removal of structures already in place. Director Naval Ordnance and Director General Design considered this effort perfectly justified. Another possibility was to transpose the forward 6-inch and 3-inch mounts. That would add appreciably to top weight. The 6-inch would be in B position, and the forward and after 6-inch mountings would no longer be interchangeable. Hence, it would require more design and production work. The 3-inch mounting would be more exposed to the sea and also to the blast of the 6-inch guns firing over it. TNC considered this solution the worst of all. It would be difficult, but not entirely impossible, to provide the waist guns with an all-round training because the centerline deck structures there could not fit into either the superstructure or the crowded hull. DTSD pointed to serious congestion and to the loss of scarce accommodation space, particularly if the superstructure were moved aft simply to clear the arcs of a single 3-inch mount. It preferred clearing the arcs of both 6-inch guns and of the waist 3-inch guns. That was approved. And then we get on to the fact that they spit brass out like anything on all of them. I actually know a friend who got pinged by a brass cap on the 3-inch gun at one point. It was not fun. Summer is coming, and they need the vitamin D. When someone says, "Oh, we do all our talks on ships," they're impressive. Act. Why don't we have them stay a day or two in the area that you can't get much intel from? The aircraft carriers probably have space for that sort of thing. If you would like a diplomatic crew hanging around on your aircraft carrier, that's the whole point of a cruiser. It's enough status that it's impressive, not so much status you don't mind them having people on there. No 40mm bofers. Nope. They were designed to be fitted for them, but not fitted with them. And if you look at the design of the ship, you can see the spaces where they would have gone. Waist behind the turrets, behind the forward superstructure. And waist behind the 3-inch guns, and also they could probably fit one on in X position. Yeah, Billa, how did the Tigers compare to Sverdlovs, especially in terms of value for money? I'd have a Sverdlov any day of the week. Animal 64. What were the issues with the RN quick-firing 6-inch gun and USN quick-firing 6-inch guns? Barrel wear and a lot of chamber issues. Cash, do you know how long, with a maximum fire rate, it would take to expend the magazines? Hypothetical, I know. I think... I think you have about 15 minutes of constant firing and 10 minutes of constant firing for the 15 minutes firing for the 6-inch and 10 minutes for the 3-inch, but I'm not 100% sure on that because let's put it this way, there is 3 figures given to me for their ammo loads. There is the theoretical design for ammo load, there is the practical ammo load, and there is the stated ammo load. Extreme turn position for a possible mount? Possibly extreme stern as well. Carl, extreme stern as well, Ben. Banhome, what was the reason the RN gave up the 40mm guns post-World War II? They didn't really give them up. They were fitting them to a lot of other things. This is the late 1950s by this point. And... gonna sound strange, but the ship looked impressive enough. They knew they could fit the 40mm quickly if they wanted to, but it was fine with 3 inches and 6 inches. It looked enough. It saved enough money. Remember what I said earlier about the cheap, the medium, and the high expensive option? Well, the 40mm being fitted would have been the medium cost. Scott, the real question is, how long can they fire constantly when stoppages are taken into account? Let's put it this way. If you can get through 3 complete cycles, i.e. 3 minutes without anything stopping, you were very lucky on these things. And it's so sad one of those couldn't be parked in San Carlos. Manpower. They were looking at them, but they didn't get either ready in time. They were activating them. And then here is Blake. As you can see, she has been converted to her helicopter carrier version. So now she has 2 quad Sea-Cat launchers. Not Sea Slug, Sea-Cat. I was wrong earlier. I think I said Sea Slug. Sea-Cat. And she has her double threes forward and her double six forward. Still no 40mm, but you can see where the space is for them. Plenty of spaces for boats, which would have been useful, and plenty of spaces for helicopters, which would have been useful. If they could have got one of these down into San Carlos, that would have been very useful for Michael Clapp, and he probably could have used it as a command ship. Because it would have had a lot more space than Fearless or Intrepid. Javila, the threat of the Sverdlov-class cruisers was to be countered by the Blackburn Buccaneer strike aircraft, not the Tiger-class Tigers, which were for presence. True. HMS Blake decommissioned in December 1979 and sulfur scrapped in August 1982. Laid down 1942. Launched December 1945. Commissioned 18th of March 1961. Her conversion to a helicopter and command cruiser took place between 1965 to 69. She had excellent command and control facilities installed, which would have been really, really useful in the Falklands. In fact, honestly, here is the point I will say. Blake and Tiger, if they had been available in the Falklands, would have been really freaking useful. And I mean really useful, mostly as command ships. Because if you consider when the British Royal Fleet and Royal Navy goes to war, they are built in 1982 on the idea they will not need to be the command fleet. Think about it. The carriers will need to command a carrier battle group, not be involved in the whole task force. Fearless and Intrepid are designed to take part in dropping the Royal Marines and their forces off in Norway. Not really commanding an amphibious assault, but doing an administrative landing to reinforce, probably under fire, their Norwegian counterparts. They don't have the command spaces. These were the command ships. There is another command ship in the Royal Navy, which we'll be talking about in a second. But these are the command ships. There should have been one of them with Vice Admiral Derek Graffel aboard, down there as Task Force Commander, and there should have been another one given to Michael Clapp for his job inside San Carlos Bay. That would have made sense. That would have been following ATP-8, and it would have been following British doctrine. But it wasn't the case. It would also have been really, really useful, as it would have got you another 8 Sea Kings down there. And given them a very practical hangar inside San Carlos Bay. Plus, that 3-inch gun would have been really interesting for any low-flying aircraft coming into San Carlos Bay to deal with. Hello! What the frick? And the 6-inch guns would have been really, really fun. Because they could have hit the large chunks of the Falkland Islands from San Carlos Bay. Okay. I had not realized how short their gun careers were, as gun cruisers Tiger served for 8 years, Lion for 5 years, and Blake for only 2 years. Pretty much the government, as soon as they built them, went, "We don't need gun cruisers anymore, we need missile ships." Ah! And the Royal Navy went, because guess what the high-end build had been? The high-cost thing had been a missile cruiser with guns, combination of, I think it was Sea Slug and Sea Cat and 3-inch guns and 6-inch guns. Carmen, how do you design a new cruiser? What would you call it and what would the armament be? We'll talk about that in a bit. Sverdov, like the Churchill tank, it was the right weapon for the last war. The Sverdov class was the right weapon for the present war, for the peacetime battle. It looked impressive as anything, could wander around the world fairly cost-effectively for the Soviet Union, and would make them look like a global power. So the Sverdov class was the right weapon to fight the presence war at the end of World War II. That's the thing about the Sverdov class. Not necessarily to fight the war, but to fight the presence war. And that's what you have to think sometimes. Is this a tool for presence, or is this a tool for warfighting? The Soviet Union doesn't care if they have sea control or not. What they care about is looking good when they turn up there. The Sverdov class does that, and they are good fighting ships for their capabilities. And the Churchills were good tanks as well. Right, Cash. What did they use for CNC rooms in Phyllis Intrepid war rooms? They did have CNC spaces. They just were tiny. As I said earlier, 6 to 12 people. Banham, looks kind of weird with the negative space between the hangar and bridge structures. Yep. That's good. Apparently Boris Johnson asked Max Hastings if he could be a war reporter while at the Standard. Apparently the response was that Hastings thought Johnson would get himself killed inside a week. You never know. I don't know. That's what I think. When I visited during the Queen's Soldier, nicer roomy, but then I was small in time. Come. What does the Iron use as a command ship today? Is it big enough? Albion and Bulwark. They're the command ships. And they really are massive. They're very good facilities. The Queen Elizabeths also have quite good facilities. And to an extent, the Type 45s have some facilities as well. Jeff Beeler, I had not realized how short their gun crews were. Vision, USS Blue Ridge. Yeah, that's the American one. Dan Freeman, having Blake or Tiger and Falcon, 6-inch guns would have been no interest to ground troops at all. I'm sure they could have figured out a way to make use of them. And given San Carlos Bay, a lot of 3-inch Dakar. William Cox, I have his Das Reich. Max, I have his Das Reich. Talks a lot about Violet Salzbell. He talks a lot about many things in his books. The powder charges had deteriorated, so it could not be used for fire support. To be fair, it's going to sound strange. They did find enough 6-inch shells when they were looking for them. They worked out they could find them. The main thing that took time was actually getting the mothballing the ships, because they'd done such a good job preserving them in case they needed them. It took ages to get them ready. Nigerian Productions, what would that missile gun cruiser have looked like? Are there any concept drawings for that there, like there are for CVA-1? It turns into CVA-1 quite quickly. That's the trouble. Because of necessary reasons. But there we go. There is a sketch. You can see the Sea Slug launcher on the back. You can see the guns forward and also all sort of around. It would have displaced 15,400 tons in deep. armament would have been a 1 twin Sea Slug launcher with 48 missiles, 2 twin 6-inch guns, 2 twin 3-inch guns, and 2 twin Mark 11 Bofors, 40mm 70s rather than 40mm 60s. Plus, they were also considering putting Seacat as well on her. So that would have been a heavy, hefty beast of 15,000 tons. JSL, could Vessel aircraft theoretically operate from cruisers like these? Yes, they could. They tested them. There's actually a picture of a Harrier landing on one of them. JP, was the problem in keeping the Tigers in service into the 80s and the fact that building on them started during World War I to World War II standards, about 40 years old by 1982? Yeah, pretty much. Pendleton, part of the reason they were so short careers as gun cruisers was they finished so late. They should have finished earlier. Yeah, they should have been, but they were still incredibly light. Clapp should have had Bristol for his flagship, I think. I think it was still in service. Yes, it should have done. Ends up, Bristol gets sent down with Vice Admiral Derek Graffel aboard to take command after the war's over. They finally send the Vice Admiral, who is in charge of all carriers and amphibious operations, down, and who's, according to all the rules, is supposed to be the task force commander, down after the war's over. Yeah, there's some politics going on then in 1982. Good to see they learned. Yeah, they sort of learned. Cox, Zumwalt is Sure, no Navy, we can't afford to buy modern missile cruisers. The government 5 years later. Wow, these cheap conversions jobs are worthless. Why are we even paying for them? Yeah, and Navy's going, we hate you. Run Cash. I think the Russians built a nuclear command ship. I'm not sure if it's still in service. I think it was one of their. It was also used. I think there's some of their icebreakers that have dual role. Considerations. Yes, one of the Kirov cruisers is now called Peter Velicki. Frederick Miles, how much influence did the RN improve Belfast Neptune design on the Svolov design via Guy Burgess? Not as much as probably some people in the Royal Navy would claim, because they'd like to claim they had a lot of influence, but more than they probably would like to admit in other ways. But the Svolov class are quite a cognizant produce of what the Soviets were building up to anyway. Why do I suspect there was a problem that the RN thought that these were cruisers for laying down and keeping rather than everyday drinking table cruisers? Anyway. So, you can see how they're storing their things and what they're using their space for. Interesting enough, you have 14 ship and aircraft warships, 13 a wardroom down there, and a far larger wardroom than originally fitted with. And the reason that they've got the bridge now enclosed. They have a lot more space built into the ship once it's been converted. And by the way, both this picture and this one are courtesy of Naval Analyses. I've basically borrowed it from their website. As you can see, lots of things fitted here, and you can talk about their weight. Their displacement now is at 12,080 tons, so their full displacement has gone up by 380 tons. Which is quite a lot considering they've lost guns, but they've taken on a lot of helicopters. A lot of communications fitted. And basically a lot of equipment added in to make these from gun cruisers into command cruisers. Basically, they were converting them from a Leander Arethusa successor into something which was supposed to be able to do the command role of a town class or a county class without the weapons fit or equivalent status, really. Wincox, Stalingrad, Kirov, Sverlovs. Wasn't there a post-Kirov before the Sverlovs? There was something as well, yeah. Adam Thunder. Does an armor belt extend ship life? As I would not think an armor belt would flex much. It can do if it's properly maintained. What does adding 380 tons do to ship stability? Let's put it this way, it doesn't necessarily improve it, but doesn't actually make it worse in Tiger's case. It basically wasn't as great as we'd have preferred at the beginning anyway. It basically makes it worse in a different way than it was before. Constance, are the turrets actually that color, or is that for illustration purposes? Illustration purposes. Gashega. The Shapaev's class. The Sverlovs were supposed to be interim improvements on the Shapaev till a whole new cruiser was designed. Then they just printed a bunch of them. It worked. The Sverlovs kept being updated as well. They really sort of fit into about 3 or 4 batches. So. Because I know there is a puppy dog somewhere, probably staring daggers at my office. Part 5. I won't do too much of this, but I will say any likes, any super chats, any subscriptions, always appreciated. Anyone who wants to go and join Discord, links down below. Patreon link down below as well. If you feel like supporting my hefty book habit. Right. So, the last cruisers. Derbscott, restability. It's not what you could call better, but it's different. So that's something. Yeah, there were issues in other ways. So here is the thing. This is the task force going to the South Atlantic, and there are no cruisers. Now that's going to sound strange to why am I talking about this, but think about that. In 1982, the first task force in over 100 years from Britain deploys without a cruiser. Okay, yes, it has a through-deck cruiser in terms of HMS Invincible, but leaving that to one side, it doesn't have a cruiser. Not as flagship, not as principal escort, not anything. It doesn't have a cruiser. Because you seem to be out of Brew 5. Thank you. That's more because I ordered Lilt because it was... how can I put this? Because it was April Fool's Day and I was going to be drinking Lilt, and they then didn't bring the Iron Brew at all. It's terrible. They're rationing fizzy drinks, I think. Anyway. That's not a through-deck cruiser. That's HMS Hermes. Dub Squad. That's Hermes. Okay? That is an aircraft carrier. Through-deck cruiser is not in that picture. I specifically chose that picture because it didn't have the through-deck cruiser in it. However, meet the county class. They don't look at all like a cruiser, do they? Nothing like a cruiser. Admittedly, they have 4.5-inch guns, 2 double turrets, and sea slug launchers at the back, and, you know, some of them lose some of their 4.5-inch guns for exocets. But they don't look like a cruiser, do they? Does anyone think that looks like a cruiser? And the trouble is, this wasn't the only ship in service with the Royal Navy which was ambiguous. Hello! Meet HMS Bristol, Type 82. 4.5-inch gun, forward. Ikra, anti-submarine missile system. There. Sea Dart, on the back. So, let's see. Definition of a cruiser. Definition of a cruiser. Well, the standard definition I tend to go to at this point basically says a general purpose asset which can stay at sea in all weathers and can be a threat against all threats. So this ship can fight submarines, can fight surface and subsurface tasks, surface vessels, and air defense. It's got 3 funnels. That has 2 funnels. But remember, the Royal Navy in Falklands War doesn't have a cruiser in service. No, Scott, did you buy Lilt because it's as close as anyone is getting to a holiday this year? Potentially. God, Jagger, the counties were very big destroyers. They were very, very big destroyers. They're pretty much the biggest destroyer around, and so was the Type 82 Bristol when she was launched. Time. Don't understand. We got a new sugar tax in Poland, so fizzy drinks went up 40 to 50%. My addiction is in pain. Ooh. Shomak, it's a destroyer leader that potentially could operate independently. Mm-hmm. Dan Freeman, I'm sorry, I have a feeling the Type 31s or 32s will be called the county class. I have a feeling the Royal Navy will not be worried that without the Duke class, that there will be whole parts of the country which will feel they're not related to the Royal Navy somehow. This is why the Royal Navy is obsessed with naming things after places. It's their politics get me out politics lesson since the town class cruisers of pre-World War II. How do we save these ships? Make sure they're named after a large area of the country. The Type 31s and 32s will be named for counties, I'm fairly sure. See, Tigers should have had 4.5-inch guns like cannon class. Standardized gun for big warships. And also, lack of steam turbines reduces. Well, they had 2 on the county and 2 on the Tiger and 3 on the Bristol. Peter Dawson, the Invincible class through-deck cruisers were supposed to be Tiger-based replacements. Supposed to be. Dev Squad, I think the gun crew of HMS Bristol have taken a distinct dislike to the British crew in that picture of Bristol. Yes. I would agree on that one. Darrison, oh look, it's the HMS Identity Crisis class ships. Most of our cruisers, large ships, have identity crises. Identity crises. Jeff Beeler. The counter-class destroyers compare well to the Apollo-class protector cruisers, or the scout cruisers. They do. Fair enough. So what you're saying is the new general-purpose Type 32s might be destroyers honest boss if we get lucky. The 32s could be very interesting. Very, very interesting. But I'm going to talk about the Type 83s because they've been announced and I couldn't resist it. And honestly, I wasn't planning on resisting it. So, the Type 83, and I'm going to finish at about 10 o'clock this evening, go walk the dog, and hopefully get to bed at some sort of respectful hour. So that means I've got about 20-odd minutes to cover this and talk about this, and I did want to talk about this tonight, because if I'm going to talk about cruisers, I've got to talk about the Type 83. The best estimate for how you're going to fulfill a general-purpose destroyer-sized hull is 14 to 16,000 tons. There are currently quite a lot of people who keep going, it's going to be an extended, bigger version of the Type 26. This is a hull designed for 8,000 tons, up to probably about 10,000 tons. You cannot take this hull and double its weight. You will be making a new hull. Whether you claim it's a new hull or not, you will be. In which case, if you're looking for an off-the-shelf hull, which is of roughly the right weight area, well, you've got the Zumwalt class hull. Now, I know we can talk about the superstructure, and I realize the gun system, well, let's put it this way. The gun system it was designed for worked. But the trouble is the gun system that they then made a big fuss about fitting in it didn't work, so it sounds like it's a failure. The gun system, that hull, though, is definitely not a failure. The hull works. So, if you're talking about a 14,000 plus ton ship, which you probably are, and you're probably looking at some region of 16 to 18,000 tons by the time we're sort of talking building this, because we're talking about this entering service in the late 2030s. So let's think about that. We're talking about entering service in 15 to 18 years' time. Considering how ships have grown in size, do we really think estimating 16,000 to 18,000 tons is me being overly... No. So, I'm sorry. In fact, and this is what I'll say, I have a great respect for UK Defence Journal. I have a great respect for many others who are making the same point. Those people who've now going around who've been... when they were talking about potentially a Type 46, it could have worked. You could have made the design work. But now they're mentioning Type 83. That was the Type 82. And seeing as it's the Royal Navy which has called it the Type 83, not the government would have gone with whatever name the Royal Navy gave it. The Royal Navy know what they're getting, and what they're getting would seem to be heading for this one. Shamak. Here is my destroyer and my bridge and helicopter destroyer. Which one would you like to buy? If we define ships by the Washington Treaty, they'd all be over. They'd be all be over. Destroyers of 10,000 tons. Cruiser is a set of functional requirements. It's all fun. Jeffrey, I think the Tigers should have been renamed Edinburgh, Exeter, and York. Possibly. That's Clark, gun crew. You were saying something about the rum ration being withdrawn, or did I miss it here? Bridge crew. Withdrawn? No, we said increased. Gun crew. I'm glad we came to an agreement. That would work. Gotcha. Take the British Zumwalt hull and fit it with British equipment. Potentially. Zumwalts are not garbage ships. There actually is a lot in them which works quite well. I agree they have problems, but there's a lot in them which work very, very well, and one of them is their seakeeping ability. That hull has turned out to be freaking fantastic. And honestly, I don't know why... let's put it this way. Again, this would be in a decade's time, we'd be looking at the hull design, but... why go to the cost of developing a hull off the shelf when you can get it into it? And in a nice way, you could almost piggyback into the Americans' new large surface escort, whatever program they're going to call it. Basically, we need something to finally frickin' replace the Arleigh Burkes. Vision, the only thing I heard about when doesn't work in Zumwalts is the guns without ammo. Just swap the guns and you have a good cruiser destroyer. Probably. Trentalenko, USN named a 688 sub Corpus Christi after a city in Texas and had to rename it the City of Corpus Christi because lots of static over naming a warship the body of Christ. Ian Cart, what would Zumwalt be like in the North Atlantic? Well, they've tested the North Atlantic and it's done quite well. Cox, I got a buddy who's a plank holder from Ticonderoga. She just went off to the scrapyards. They were good ships, but they were also really not ships you wanted to be in the seaway when they were rough water. If you were in the CIC, you were going to feel sick. Steel is cheap, but people cost. It's all about the automation, and generally crew will want their own cabins with ensuite facilities. Probably not the en-suites, but yeah. Carmen, what's your expectation Type 23? Sorry, my friend needed me. My expectation is it's going to be more Zumwalt than that, because as I've been having this discussion with people and they're going, oh, we can scale up the Type 26, we can scale up the Type 31, and I'm going, you'll need to scale it up a lot. If you're building a Type 83, and if you're comparing the Type 82 to the Type 42, you get a figure of around about 14,000 tons. I would say that in 2030s, and this is what you're going to be talking about, late 2030s, so they're talking 2035 onwards, so 14 plus years time, I think you're talking about a ship of 16 to 18,000 tons. I think you're talking about a crew of probably 140 it's redesigned for, if not less, with the ability to take a command staff and Marines aboard of probably about another 80 to 90 if they need them. I think you're talking about a lot of missiles. I think if you're talking in bilge pumps terms of missile rating, I think you're talking VLS tubes probably in the region of a second rate and a lot of firepower. Cox, gotta get into World of Warships and check mail. Sorry, and do my dailies. Enjoy. God, Jagger, that hull makes me feel things. It is a good hull. Ben Groen, I bet the Americans would be more than willing to recoup some of their losses on the Zumwalt design. That's the thing, the Americans actually haven't made losses on the Zumwalt design, because they got 3 fairly good ships in service. The people who made losses are the people who kept obsessing over the 8-inch railgun. And honestly, the railgun, the issue to solve it is the power supply issue. And the only ways you can solve it is having a massive, great big stonking capacitors aboard the ship and battery system, basically, or a nuclear reactor. Those are your 2 options. You either have to have huge amounts of power available instantaneously, or have to be able to store and build up power. Shermack, Dr. Clark. Coming soon to a US naval base near you. Flight $4. Honestly, not a new ship. Adam Findon. Somewhat hull design came out from Norwegian oil support ships, so seakeeping was a very important initial design factor. It's a very, very good hull. Come on, honestly, the left design looks cool. No. Oh, that's fine. That's tough. Yeah. Type 26 does look cool, but it ain't going to be able to grow up to... You would have to double the displacement. Okay, let's think about it. You're taking the hull and going, I'm going to grow you so you double your displacement. It's not the same hull. It's going to have to grow in beam and length and the draft, everything. It's not a case of I can scale up a hull to twice its displacement. Gahan, so you think the iron is aiming to be at... Yes. Wincox, Citroen's high performance cannon. The railgun also has a massive waste heat problem. They solved that, if I remember correctly, with... I think it was they were shooting liquid nitrogen or something up the inside of it to cool it down every few shots. Dan Freeman, if we are rebuilding HMS Dreadnought, will it come complete with the latest in anti-submarine ram bar? We can always hope. How's the plan able to use railgun? They weren't. They built a Gauss gun, which is a different system. Far easier to build. Basically, how do I put this? The Americans were doing their usual thing of trying to invent the ballpoint pen working in space. Those disposable things they developed. And the Chinese, copying the Russians, went for the equivalent of the pencil, which was the Gauss gun. Which we all know really quite well. And actually, you often see Gauss guns in movies because they're the ones often given as infantry rifles because you can scale them down so much easier than like email. The Canadian Type 26 looks more destroyerish in capabilities, probably because we have no destroyers. Yes, but you're talking it's grown up to about 10,000 tons. And that's good. But again, still, to get to the cruiserish, this is an anti-submarine frigate, and you want to grow up to cruiserish, which is Type 83 will be cruiserish. That's a long, long way. I can scale up to a hull to twice displacement, says MD. While this stream, the bridge sank 2 foot in the ship. Can we not do this again? Pretty much, that's what I'm saying, okay? Banno, what is the reason the ships grow so massively? I mean, most tech gets smaller, and while the missiles take up a lot of space, the difference between 8,000 tons and 14,000 tons is massive. You're putting in a lot more missiles, and that's the thing. If you're talking about an air defense destroyer, it's 48 missiles for your air defense. You talk about Type 45s, if they have the Mark 41 VS fitted, that's 72 missiles. And then they have their guns. But also, if you're talking about it, right then, so in 2030s, will we be fitting a railgun? Probably. Or some variation of it. Will we be wanting power generation for lasers? Probably. So we'll need a lot more power generation and power storage. Power storage is heavy. If you ever looked at why SSKs are denser in many ways than SSNs, it's because of the power storage of their batteries. So you're talking about a lot of weight. You're also saying, I want a ship which can operate at long range, I want it to be able to do presence missions, and I want it to be able to go fast. You end up with 14,000, you end up with 14,000, 16,000, 18,000 tons very, very quickly under those circumstances. Not because, look, the cruiser, the gun missile cruiser, which the Royal Navy was talking about in the late 1950s, early 1960s, was 15,000 tons. It's not, ships don't grow massively. It's, when you want to be able to do, it's got to be as good at the land attack role as it is at the air defense role, as it is at the self-defense role, as it is at the anti-ship role, as it is at the anti-submarine role, if you wanted to do everything. When you compare it to Type 45, which is meant to be an air defense destroyer with a big capability elsewhere, or a Type 26, which is an anti-submarine warfare frigate with some capabilities elsewhere, that's a lot, because basically you're saying, I'm going to combine the capabilities of a Type 26, kunk, the capabilities of a Type 45, kunk, and the presence, mission, and maintaining of the Type 31, 32s, kunk. Meet my new destroyer! It may look like a cruiser, a massive cruiser, but it's a destroyer. Yeah. Sure, man. I can make a core gun, and you can make a core gun, and Plan can sure as make a Gauss gun. Yeah. DevScon. Re-Space Pen. This story is false. The US and USSR both used the $1 million pen graphic shard in zero-G. A great way to get short circuits and to start fires. Bad idea. Yes, but it's not. It is false, but it's also true. In that the Soviet Union, basically, the Americans paid to develop it, the Soviet Union plans to use the pencil, and eventually they realized there are lots of troubles with it, and when they decided to then nick the pen from the Americans. That's why you had the big pen. Carmen, with Type 83, will it be like HMS Bristol is cruiser presence and UK will need a Type 48 as a more mass-producible design destroyer? I'm hoping not. I'm hoping they will just build enough Type 83s. At least. I've heard talk of people building up 8 of them. And that will be useful. And given destroyers up to 10,000 tons, there are already destroyers well over 10,000 tons, Adam. Oh. And got battery tech sucks. It does. Actually, Russians use ballpoints as they worked in 0-G. Pencils flake graphite, which can get in your eyes, or etc. Electronics. Agreed. Yes. Cam, isn't a Type 32 a mine countermeasure small vessel officially? Heard this in RN Admiral. Yes, basically they're taking a Type 31 and they are altering it a bit so it can carry all the countermeasures, specifically can carry all the RN mine countermeasure stuff. So basically imagine a Type 31 hull just able to launch all the things you need for anti-mine warfare. Ben Curran, predicting the Type 23s are free? I wouldn't be surprised if we are still in the Pacific in the 2030s and there still hasn't been any issues if there are 8, because they'll want one deployable out there, and for that they'll need 4 of them. They'll need to have one out in the Pacific at all times and on rotation out there. They'll need a certain number. They'll need for the carrier battle 2 for the carriers. So that's you need at least a pair for each of the carriers. So that's 4. If you want one out in the far east, yeah. So you end up with 8 quite quickly. But what about 8 Type 23 and 12 Type 48? It means you can afford to deploy a few and gives you extra DACA. It does, but I doubt you get the 12 Type 48 or the 8 Type 23, 8 Type 83. You probably get 8 Type 48. And the Royal Navy knows that enough to be damn quiet about any idea of producing a 48. Right, it's about 3 minutes till I go. So, evening, Jeff Beeler. Take care. I'm going to be going off and walk the dog myself. Couldn't that make it less effective at a counter sub? Type 31 and Type 32 are both going to be interesting ships for anti-submarine operations. Basically, they rely on their helicopters for ASW, and they do limited work. As they don't need to be made of plastic, it's going to be all standoff, and literally it's unmanned, uncrewed systems which are going to go into minefields. Probably divers as well. That's probably some of the systems they're going to have fitted in will help them support divers. Take care, William Cox. Take care, Constance. Now 63365. When you want a ship to do more jobs and more specialized job, its size grows. Pretty much. Basically, the ships grow in size. Take care, Vision. Take care, Carlsberg. Take care, Paul. Wish the RN would get into the habit of working in units of 3. They did used to. They did used to. Honestly, we do need 9 Type 26, 6 Type 31s, 9 Type 23, and 9 Type 32s, and probably 9 Type 83s. But, you know, that's going to be for me to keep arguing about, and for other people to hopefully chip in and back me up on. And if anyone notices that 999 does add up, and 6 does add up to 33, yay. Take care, Albazaski. Take care, Crazy Locker. Take care, Sean Mack. Thank you. Thank you, Paul Westwick. Thank you, Rick Vasala. Thank you, Pomtuck. Thank you, DG40. Thank you, Grosowski. And thank you, Rowan Cash. Thank you, Adam Flinton. Thank you, Carl Gasberg. Thank you, everyone, basically. Not that one. Thank you. Have a nice evening, and thank you everyone for watching. And please remember, if you do please press push the little sort of thumbs up down. Maybe subscribe if you want to watch more. Press the little bell if you want to be alerted when I have a live, because theoretically YouTube is going to get that to work. Theoretically, hopefully it'll work soon. And if, as I said, if you're interested in supporting me, then please do consider coming along to the conversation that is the Discord, which is constantly chatting, and I'm always watching. Well, when I'm awake. And possibly consider the Patreon if you want to support my very, very expensive book habit, which I love, and probably stopped me getting into far worse habits. But, you know, everything's helpful when you're a junior lecturer. Thank you very much, and have a nice evening. Thank you. Bye-bye. Night Hieroglyph, night Stan Freeman, night Yickers, Night Bill Bolton, night Dirt Squad, night Carl Harmon, and Mateo Slavic. Thank you. Take care.